Hi, everyone, and welcome to Abduction, Victim to Survivor. I'm here with my co host, Sarah, and we have the honor of having a wonderful professional, amazing. You're going to hear all about her, Heather McTaggart-Bryan. She's a full-time therapist with a practice called Expand Psychology. She's a licensed professional counselor in Virginia, a registered play therapist, and certified clinical trauma specialist. Her client-centered, trauma-informed approach integrates play and expressive therapies, support children affected by complex trauma. She works closely with schools to enhance children's learning experiences, and she consulted where I used to work at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children since 2008. And she provided support to recovered children and their families. And she's also the fantastic mother to 3 children. She specializes in trauma, attachment, play therapy, high conflict divorce, and child sexual behavior concerns. The reason we wanted Heather to be a guest on our podcast is because she has extensive experience with children impacted by abuse, family abduction, and sexual exploitation. She earned her undergraduate degree in psychology from the State University of New York in Plattsburgh and her master's in counseling psychology from Lesley University in Massachusetts. She's worked in diverse clinical settings all across New York, Massachusetts, Washington, D.C., and Virginia, including outpatient clinics, intensive outpatient programs, schools, residential treatment centers, and private practice. And for 16 years, she was in private practice at the Gill Institute for Trauma and Recovery, where I had the pleasure of working with her for a little over a year. She's trained in theraplay and dyadic developmental psychotherapy, circle of security, trauma focused CBT, and trauma focused integrated play therapy. She's just so experienced. And I remember the first time that I had the pleasure of meeting Heather. It was at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They had some Japanese folks there who wanted to know about how family abduction was treated in or handled in the United States. And Heather did a presentation there. And I have to tell you that I saw her present and I started crying. And I was crying because it just hurt my heart so much that I didn't know about her when my son was recovered. Heather is, it's not just that she's experienced, she's intuitive, and she is able to make these strong connections with children and to help them heal. And that's why we wanted her on our program today, to show you the impact of family abduction on children and how Heather is able to help them so they can grow to be good, functional, healthy adults. So, Heather, please help us understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. That was quite an introduction, and it is a pleasure to be here, and I am very honored to be here. Like Abby said, I have about 25 years experience in working with the field of complex trauma. And one of the things that I have found in working with children who have experienced parental kidnapping is that a lot of people don't understand how complex the trauma is. And some people don't even understand that it is a traumatic event. And so part of my work has been advocacy and helping other people, other industries, other countries even to understand that there's a significant impact on these children. And I have worked directly with the children. I also work with the families because I firmly believe that this is not work you can do in isolation and just work with the child. So I also believe that when it comes to working with this complex trauma, that it's really important to think out of the box when treating children and families who have experienced parental abduction. Because there are so many layers to it, you can't just go in and sit with a child and say, tell me about this and what happened to you, because often the child is very confused about their relationship with the parent who abducted them and the parent who has been searching for them. And so those two complexities and putting them together are really, it's really important to think about how to reach the child in a way that they can express themselves honestly, but through their subconscious. And that is why I use a lot of expressive therapies when I work with children who've experienced parental abduction.
Mm.
So, as you can all see, I am in my office right now. And one of the modalities that I often use with kids is sand tray therapy. It is a great modality of treatment. And I incorporate that with a lot of trauma CBT, child centered play therapy, but also some directive play therapy too. And so it's not the traditional kind of play therapy that clinicians may learn about as they're in graduate school. And I think specifically why I use all of those things is because it works and it works really well. And when a child is abducted by a parent, there's a lot of alienation that occurs. And that alienation and narrative that's created for the child is very confusing when they're returned to the searching parent. And so there, when I say there are complex levels, those are the levels. And so often, when I sit with a child who's been recovered, their story may be that, yes, I went on vacation with a parent and we were gone for a while. And then they have a narrative of what was created by the taken parent. And that narrative really creates what I call a trauma bond with the other parent. And working through that with a kid, you can't just sit there and say, tell me about what happened and tell me what your parent told you, because there is a trauma bond that keeps them very loyal to that person. And so their expressive work will give you so much more information. Um, and sometimes I wish I could show all the expressive work, but it really is like exposing the child. So I will just talk about the expressive work, and that you may sit with a kid who says, oh, it was okay. And we lived here, we did this, and this happened or that happened. And the affect will be very kind of uplifting. But then when they create their work, it shows a different story. And they're able to project the subconscious in ways that you would not be able to get to if you were just doing talk therapy. Um, it is important to note that I did not go into my clinical work thinking that I would end up sitting in a podcast talking about parental kidnapping. And so, for those who are interested in learning how to be more apt to work with children and family who have experienced parental kidnapping, don't feel overwhelmed by it, because it's not something you just wake up one day and start doing. It is, I worked a lot with complex trauma at the Gill Institute and ended up working in and with a lot of high conflict divorce situations, which often leads to parental kidnapping. And during that time period, I started doing consulting work at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children
Mhm.
and learned more and more about parental kidnapping, some of which I learned as I went along. And now I supervise and provide consultation for lots of new clinicians on how to recognize complex trauma, how to recognize signs and symptoms of alienation, how to help high conflict divorce situations protect themselves and their children from the potential of parental kidnapping, and then
Mhm.
how to work with a recovered child and family, which is very important because, as I said, this work does not happen in isolation. And there have been situations where I've actually worked with the family before all the children were recovered. And so that component is kind of where you start thinking out of the box, and that I clearly can't sit with a child who is still missing, but I can sit with the searching parent and help them. And I can sit with the child who has been returned to the searching parent and help them start to heal. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I I mean, we can see that you're in your office and you have many shelves filled with miniatures. And I'm just wondering if you could explain more about the sand therapy and and about the miniatures and how they're used. And um, one thing that among many things that I did learn from you is after the child is finished, you say to them, tell me as much or as little as you want. And
Yes.
that always struck me because that's so, it leaves it so open for them. And
Mhm.
it's such a kind thing to say, no pressure. It's
No
like,
pressure.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely no pressure. But it's so interesting, this antray therapy. And so if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I would love to take credit for that statement, but it is definitely something Dr. Ileana Gill taught me.
Ah,
Um, who anybody who knows play therapy knows Dr. Ileana Gill,
yes.
and I did my training in Sandtray with her, along with a couple other people as the years developed. So the tray itself is just an uh, open
Yeah.
tray of sand, and the miniatures stand behind them. And when you're doing non directive play, you just merely ask the client to create a world, and they can use as many or as few miniatures as they want to. And so often, when I first start to work with children who have been recovered, I'll do non directive play. And the thought behind doing the non directive stuff is that it really gives the child the control of the play and the control of the expression, which, as you can all imagine, for a child who has been taken from a parent, they had no control in that situation. And most trauma, there is at the core, there's no control in the situation, which is why child centered works really well for a kid. So I may start non directively with them and let them project what they put out there. And then you are absolutely right, Abby. I say to them, say as much or as little as you would like about your tray. And some kids will express verbally a lot of stuff, and other kids will just sit there and look at it, because really what play therapy is about is that the toys in the miniatures are their language, and they are symbolic to their language. And so even if the kid doesn't give you any verbalization, what they've put in front of you is their thoughts and their feelings in a very deep and kind of unconscious way. And so then we start to look at the themes that are in the tray, and combine that with looking at the themes that come up in their play. Often with children who have experienced parental abduction, there's a lot of themes of power and control, separation, isolation, lack of resources, lack of attachment, fear. And those are all things that I would see in a tray that a kid could never label for themselves. Yes.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I will shift into more directive play in the sand tray. And I may do something like split the tray in half and say, use one side to show what it was like when you were with your taken parent, and one side to show me what it's like since you've been home. And then the kids will project in that way. And so it does often move into directive play, depending on where the child is in their healing process.
hmm Yeah. I know it's so interesting. When I was at Gill and I also took a course with Eliana on
Mhm.
sand tray therapy, and her intuition and understanding was amazing. And you take all these little characters and the sand tray miniatures, it's everything. It's little figurines, it's
Mhm.
houses and trees and bridges and animals and themes of death and themes of birth and all kinds. And it's so interesting the way that the children gravitate towards it, and even adults.
Yeah, oh,
And
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, I can remember when I first did my very first training with Ileana was Sandtray. And I at first was not completely sold on it. I was like, how does
yeah,
this work? And in the training, she has you, and now I do trainings too, and we have the participants actually complete a tray. And when I did my tray and Ileana looked at it, I was like, whoa, I had no idea I just put that much stuff out there to you. And it really is so powerful how kids are drawn to certain, and adults are drawn to certain miniatures that symbolize so many different things, and they become very connected to the miniatures. And so there's a certain way that they're organized on the shelves and categorized, and they are all supposed to live in the same space so that when the person comes back, there's the predictability of, oh, my items that I will use to express will still be right where I left them. Yeah, it's fascinating and powerful for sure.
yeah, it is. And I know you use art therapy also, because I remember in your presentation you showed some artwork of some children, and it kind of told the story of
Mm-hmm.
how they were feeling and how you interpreted it. I believe there was one that had a building and a plane, and
Yes.
yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know if
great memory, Abby. That's a
I'm
terrific
telling you,
memory.
you made such an impact on me,
Oh,
Heather. I was just, I wanted so much for my son to have the right therapy, and we had tried so many different therapists that that part was almost traumatizing, trying to find the right person who could
mhm.
help him. Um,
I can imagine.
so yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah, and so I'm not an art therapist, but I do use, oh, hey, kitty, I
yeah,
do use art therapy to help kids
yeah,
express. And so often I do what's called a developmental play-based assessment, which was created by Dr. Ileana Gill. And there are certain
yeah,
tasks in there that are art therapy based, and one of which is draw a picture of yourself doing something, a free draw, and then draw a picture of your family doing something. And so, and I also want to caveat this by saying that the um, artwork that you're referring to, the parents have signed consents for me to use it for training purposes to talk about.
right,
And this child was taken for a couple of weeks. And when I asked him verbally to describe to me what happened, he lit up and was like, we went on vacation to a place that had these really big buildings, and we it was fun, and we ate candy and we ate chips, which clearly he was eating out of a vending machine. And so his affect was very like upbeat and presented in a different way. Everybody had told me that this kid was very depressed, but when he sat in front of me and I asked him to tell me his story, that is not what it looked like. And then when I asked him to do his drawings, he drew a picture of a lot of buildings, and just with pencil, which the kids are getting given every kind of medium. And so when you looked at the picture, I don't know if you remember or not, Abby, you could feel the energy of depression coming out
yes,
from the picture, which is one of the first things you're taught to look at when you're looking at art. And it was a bunch of big buildings next to each other, and there was one little person up in a window high in a corner, and all the windows were colored in. And so that very symbolically said that nobody was getting to me and I wasn't getting out. And the plane just kept flying over the buildings, and people just passed and nobody got to us. And so, with that picture, he was projecting so much more of his inner consciousness of being sad, being not able to be connected to people, not being able to be seen, not being able to be heard, and that it really was a scary situation for him. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
There's something so powerful, and any art or creative therapy that I've done mainly as an adult, because that's when I started working on myself after
Hmm.
very long term abduction. has been so powerful. And every piece of art that I did, whether I got to take it home with me or not, is in my heart forever. It made such a strong impression. So I just, from that perspective, because yes, there's something you get in touch with in a whole different way
Absolutely.
when when it comes to being to art. And even when I was on the run with my father, I used to make these little pictures all the time, and I always hid them from my father or tore them up, of a mom and a dad and a bunch of kids. And I'd name everybody, how old they were, what school the kid went to, and if they had their own room or they had to share it with a sibling. And
Mm-hmm.
these were all things I didn't have, but I really wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So, and sometimes I'd make 15 children, like the family would be 15 kids, and I would be one of them. And I
Mm-hmm.
take great pains to fit myself in. Would I be the oldest or the youngest or in the middle? And how many older brothers would I have? And how many younger sisters? And I'm just thinking about how symbolic that was.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
it's so clear, even me, who's not a therapist, can
Yes.
see the meanings here, but
Mm-hmm.
they were so pivotal to me. I would escape into a fantasy world for
Mm-hmm.
hours and create my families.
It's
And yeah,
amazing.
so but I can only imagine just looking. I want to go play in your you get in touch in a whole different way.
A
But
whole
with
different way, Sarah. You're
yeah,
absolutely
and it,
right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think so when I think about being a therapist, it's something that comes very naturally to me. I love
Yeah.
it. It's a calling. It's my blessing. It's my purpose. But I often think about the piece that Abby was saying as far as connecting with individuals. And so when I meet with a parent who has been through the most horrific thing a parent could ever imagine. And they walk into my office and I'm a complete stranger and they need to trust me with their child. And just that in the complexity of building that relationship with the parent, they walk into my office and see how playful it is. And so
Yeah.
that kind of inviting to the space, I think really helps the parent. And I mean, I can count on, I think I've had two kids in my career who got to my door and had a hard time coming in the 25 years I've been doing this, because it does create that space that is just welcoming and come
Yeah.
into it.
safe.
Yeah, and it's safe. And it's
Yeah.
and it's safe. And when I think about working with kids and families who have experienced complex trauma, particularly parental abduction, like safety is the number one thing. And if you can create that safe place of,
Yeah.
come into here and try to trust me and try to trust that I can hold your story and I can help you move through this story and heal. I think it takes a lot of toys. It takes a lot of tools. And, sometimes the most important tool is me and my relationship with the individuals, but other times you have to be able to pull from other resources to sit with these kids and to help them heal and express, just like you said, Sarah, because art and play come so naturally to kids. And we always say in the play therapy world that, often I think people think we just play with kids. And yes, I do. I play with kids, but there is purpose and there is meaning behind it, because when a child is born, they do not come out talking. It would be really nice if they came out talking and handed us a book and told us what to do with them, but they don't. And so
Yeah.
they use their behaviors and their crying to tell us what they need, first and foremost. And then the second way kids communicate is through play. They actually do that before they even develop language. And so play is a universal language that can be used to help kids heal. And within the context of play is obviously art too. So it is, I kind of geek out about it and talk a lot about it, and I'm very
Yeah.
passionate about it, but it is very effective modalities. They are very effective modalities,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Mhm.
And safety is paramount, I think, to control,
Yes.
because when they are, after they are taken, they have no control
Hmm.
over anything. And regardless of the circumstances surrounding them being taken, whether it was them thinking they've decided that they need to go with that parent or whether they're taken against their will, they eventually don't have any control over what's happening. Many of them aren't in school. Many of them, their identity has changed. Their names are changed. They're told to say that the other parent is deceased or dangerous or
Mhm.
or something along those lines. And it's as if everything is taken away from them,
Yeah.
even their name.
Yes.
And so, giving them that control, which you do in many, many different ways. I mean, in telling them, tell me as much or as little as you want, but I'm sure you have other ways of providing control to the children.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a great point, Abby. And I know that both of you can think about that
Yeah.
need for control in different ways, and that you've been on different spectrums of parental kidnapping. And so both of you get that from a child's perspective, the control is really important. From a parent's perspective, it is too. And so I come at it from many different levels. Typically my first interaction with working with a child who has been parentally kidnapped is with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Usually,
Yes.
the referrals usually come through there.
Yeah.
But then my next experience will be with the parent. And I, again, I think very out of the box of how to meet the parent where they are. And so, does that mean meeting at the center because that's where they're most comfortable? Does that mean meeting in my office because that's where they're more comfortable? Does that mean sitting out on my patio at my office because that's where they're more comfortable? And yes, to all of the above, and then some, because I think that original connection with the parent is really important and helps the parent to have some control over it. And so I start there for sure. And then with the child, I talk about even in the waiting room, I start that to give them the feeling of control of, do you want to play a game as we walk down the hallway? Do you know how to play follow the leader? Because follow the leader puts the kid in control immediately. And it also sets the stage for play. And so we're going to do something, and we're going to do it in a way that is playful. And then when we get to the office, one of the first things I always say to kids is that I have the strangest job in the world. I am a complete stranger to you. And I know you know why you're here to see me. And people think you should talk to me about the hardest things that have ever happened to you. And I just want you to know that you never have to talk about it if you don't want to, because there are so many other ways that we can be together and we can move forward without talking. And we can play and we can get in my sand tray and we can draw and we can do all of those things. And though that statement just takes the air right out of kids, because they think they're going to therapy and they have to talk. And for a child who, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this, Sarah, who has been taken away and told not to talk about why they're away, or whatever the narrative was that was created by the taking parent, that within itself gives them so much control. And so I start with that piece, and then I introduce them to my space, and I show them
Mhm.
around the room, and I introduce them to the miniatures, to the sand tray, to the toys, to the games, to the art supplies, and I say, and you can choose what we do today. And they're like, what? I get to choose. And that too gives them some control. And then I just follow their lead, which gives them the control too. I also often tell kids within the first session that I have been doing this work for many, many, many years, and I have worked with all kinds of kids. I have worked with kids who have parents who are divorced, who have trouble struggling in school, whose parents have taken them away from another parent, who have been involved in touching that they did not ask for. And I list a bunch of things, and then I say to them, and I can promise you, there is nothing you could say to me that you did or was done to you that would ever make me feel differently about you. And this is a safe enough space if you want to say those things. And so I give them permission to talk if they want to talk. Yeah.
Beautiful.
I I know a young, well, I know a lot of people who were sexually exploited, and one in particular who told me that she wasn't able to talk to her mother or other people because if she would start to express or share what happened to her, she could see by their body language how it was hurting them. So she would just close right down and not be able to say anything. So, as a therapist, that has to be so hard because there are so many horrific things that these kids experience. And to maintain the body language and facial expressions that it's all
Mhm.
okay and that you're not being affected by it. That has to
Mhm.
be pretty hard.
That's a great point, Abby. I have a client who was trafficked by a teacher, and she had had many therapists before she came to me. And one of the things she said to me when she was disclosing part of her trauma was she leaned in and she goes, "You're not crying." And I said, "No, I'm not crying." She
Yeah.
goes, "You're the first person I've told this story to and haven't cried." And I just said to her, "Well, what is that like for you?" And she was like, "It feels safe, like you
Yeah.
can hold it for me." And I do. I hold a lot for kids, for adolescents, for adults. I definitely do. And it can be hard at times. There are definitely moments, and
Yeah.
there have been moments where I have teared up,
Yeah.
and I've felt it, and I acknowledge it for them in those moments. I think that what I do outside of my office for myself to take
Yes.
care of myself is why I can be so present with these really hard, heavy stories. And I think the other part of it is that I I feel honored that people would share their stories with me and that they feel safe enough to put them here with me. And one of my clients often says, "I don't know how you hold all of this, but I'm glad you can."
Yeah.
Like I am too. I'm glad I
Yeah.
can too. Yeah. It can be challenging at times, but I have an amazing supervisor. I do my own therapy outside of here. When I have a very challenging session, I do a sand tray myself to try to leave it there.
Ah,
And I do a lot of exercise outside of here too, so that I
yeah.
have a place to put all this stuff so that I can be present for people when they need it to be held.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Mhm.
You know, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to ask, do you see very specific recurring themes in children who've experienced family abduction? I mean, you mentioned some of them earlier in general,
Mhm.
but do you see? I'm just going to compare notes a little bit with all the folks that I've spoken with, not as a therapist, but as sort of a peer supporter over the years. So I was
Yeah.
just
So, themes, Sarah, are you asking themes in their expressive work or themes from a mental health perspective? Because I can speak to both of those.
I would say maybe to start with more of a mental health perspective, like the issues, the core issues that they're dealing with
Absolutely.
specifically.
So it's a great question. I see a lot of depression in kids and adolescents when upon returning and working through the trauma, confusion. And depression, keep in mind too, looks very different in children than it does in adolescents and adults, and that it looks more like sometimes severe mood swings and aggression and acting out behavior,
Mhm.
depending on the child. So I do see a lot of that. I see a lot of disorganized attachment styles, in that they're confused about their relationships and were very aligned with the taken parent because of the narrative that was created. And
Mhm.
every client that I have worked with, I need to think about that for a second, did not have contact with the taken parent afterwards, mostly for legal reasons and other things. Um, with time, some attempted it, but that confusion of not being able to have contact with that person and that kind of trauma bond that they have becomes very confusing. There's obviously signs and symptoms of alienation that need to be worked through. So that's a huge thing that I see too. Um, those are the main things from a mental health perspective. And then obviously PTSD is definitely very present for survivors.
So, I mean, I'm a big proponent, this is just me, of maintaining contact when possible and when safe with the taking parent. And
Hmm.
it's very tricky, and it's very individual to each case, and it depends on the taking parent's mental state and,
Yes.
and safety and all of those things. So I have very strong respect for that.
Hmm.
I cut off my relationship with my father, who was my abducting parent,
Hmm.
for many years and then reconnected maybe 7 or 8 years before he died. And that was very meaningful to me, that he got to meet my children and that we got to have a relationship that was on my terms. He
Yeah.
lived on another continent, so that helped. But I mean, there are many cases where children, especially if the abduction was long term, they maintain relationships with the taking parent. Um, but yeah, so there's actually, in my case, recovery was actually the more traumatic event
Yeah.
in a way. In
Yeah.
a way, because I mean, I didn't remember. I was so young when I was taken.
Hmm.
And obviously,
Yeah.
there were many years of trauma within all that. And I would say for me, depression, yes, but sadness, like the depression was more sadness, confusion, and
Yeah.
pain. It wasn't just sort of like clinical depression for
Yeah.
no apparent
Yeah.
reason. So I personally like to label that sadness or grief, or more than depression, but that's me.
Hmm.
So I was just, yeah. So that's interesting that for legal, the children that you've worked with, that there were legal bases for the children being cut off, sometimes I would imagine very abruptly, from the taking parent. So I can own, or not, maybe not always,
Yes
but
and
yeah.
no. It depends. And I'm glad, Sarah, that you said the piece about the loss and grief, because that is huge. That's a huge theme that comes up for the kids. So much loss and grief of, what their life would have been like, what their life was like, their relationships, if there are siblings, sibling relationships. So loss and grief is a huge thing that comes up. And that one of, the I would advocate too, in certain situations, that there be a relationship with the taken parent and that the child have some say in what that looks like.
Mhm,
I advocate for that in many other situations too, but definitely in this.
mhm,
However, several of the cases I've worked on, there have been legal implications
mhm.
as to why they couldn't have contact and other circumstances that led to no contact too.
Of course, of
Um,
course.
and one of the pieces that you also spoke to, Sarah, that I think is really important, and that I think the Center for Missing and Exploited Children has really worked hard on, is that recovery piece. Because I've been doing this long enough that I have seen what a not so good recovery does to a child. And I've seen that where, one kid watched his taken parent be arrested and handcuffed, and that came out in all of his expressive work of how traumatic that was. And then other kids that I've worked with, it was handled so much better, and so like just very planful. And again, the center does such a great job of putting resources in place and putting people there like me, clinicians there.
Mhm. Yeah.
They tried to get me to go to other countries to help recover
Yeah.
kids, which I would do if I was available.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so I think that that recovery piece is a huge, huge thing to consider and think about.
It's huge.
We actually had Lene from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children
Hmm.
talk about that subject,
Yeah.
about the right way to do a recovery. And
Mhm.
I showed the little video clip of when Sam was reunited with me, which was so harmful, and talked about the recovery,
Mhm.
which you're right, that is a lot of times the most traumatic part of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, do you work much with parents? Are you able to help them work through that? Because I would imagine that, I mean, well, I know for the parent, that's the most wonderful part of it. And
Mhm.
um, to help them understand how distressful this is, not because of their attachment or lack of attachment to the searching parent, but because the way it's done.
Mhm. Yeah. Yes, I talk a lot to parents about the recovery and what that if we have the opportunity to do it, because as you can imagine, sometimes the recovery happens like that, and
Right,
you don't always have time to process up into that point. But
right,
yes, I work closely, and this is the piece, Abby, that I'm talking about, of thinking out of the box. Like,
right.
I work very closely with the parent, and help them to understand not only what they're going to feel, but what their child could be experiencing in the moment too. And this may feel like the best moment of your life, which
Yes,
I'm sure it does, Abby. And to the child, which I'm sure you could speak to more, Sarah, it's confusing. And
yes,
they're leaving a life that they have known, or a time period, because it's not always years and years and years, a time period that they knew with a person that to some degree they felt safe and taken care of. And so that's hard. And then the work eh, with the parent does not stop there, because it's then helping them to understand that trauma bond that they have with the taken parent, and the alignment that they have with the taken parent, when the searching parent has all this anger and resentment and hate towards that parent, and the kid is coming back into the space with love and admiration and a narrative that is probably not that great about the searching parent. And so, how to help them reconnect and form a healthier attachment too is part of the work that I do.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's great, Heather. And I know a lot of people. Yeah, I call it the romance period, where maybe it's the first week or something after the child is home. Everything seems to be perfect. And then the issues start coming out. The reactions to what happens start coming out in the child. And people, and also people think, oh, children are so resilient, they just bounce back, not realizing that everything is inside them and they're
Yeah.
going to react to it. And that's something that parents need help with also.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so, when I talk about parenting, I talk about parenting from a couple different components, and that all parents engage in interactions with their children, hopefully, that kind of the basis of them are for structure, nurture, engagement, and challenge. And those four domains are really important when you're looking at a parent child relationship. And often, when there's a traumatic situation, be it parental kidnapping, the parent really wants to lean into the nurturing, like, and obviously you want to lean into that. You haven't been able to nurture your child for whatever time period, and so you want to do that and you want to give that, and the child may be resistant to some of that nurturing. And then when there's structure in place, the kid's going to fight up against that structure. And so that piece is really important to keep in place, is the structure, because often parents will want to back away from structure and kind of accommodate for the child to get used to the environment.
Yeah.
And you're right, Abby. There is, I call it a honeymoon period,
Yeah.
where the child is, this is exciting, this is new, this is great. And then kind of life sets in. I'm in a new school. I don't know anybody. Again, depending on what the age of the child is and when they were taken, I may be in a new family unit completely with other siblings that I haven't seen in a while, all kinds of things. And when those structure pieces fall into place, that's when you start seeing kind of the challenges that the child may have. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So much information, so much good information, not just on the child, but for the parent too. It's wonderful, because so many people think, oh, it's okay, the child is with the other parent, and then when they come back, it's like happily ever after. I know when Sam was reunited with me, the FBI agent there said they had the news there, which was the worst thing they could have
Mm-hmm.
done.
Mm-hmm.
And the FBI agent said, oh, all we see is joy. And I wanted to scream at him and say, no, all you see is fear.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, and
Mhm.
that's, Abby, it's interesting because you speak to that, because even when you are away from your child for a very long time, you're still attuned to them, and you can feel and see the things that, other people may not see. And it's, I feel the same way when I sit with kids. Like, everybody will describe this kid as, oh, they're doing fine and they're happy go lucky. And then I sit with the child and I can feel what they are feeling, and then they project it in their play and express it in other ways. And
Yeah.
it's, when I say think out of the box, that's what I mean. Think out of the box, because uh, law enforcement, other providers, like, sometimes don't, other countries, like, I went to Japan to talk to,
Yeah.
lawyers and judges to help them to understand that this really is traumatic. And here are the traumatic implications of it. And just because it's a parent that the kid is with, it doesn't mean that they're like, oh, life is great and life is good and I'm happy.
Right.
It's so much more complex than that. And really, when I talk about trauma, no matter what kind of trauma it is, the hardest part of healing from a traumatic event is the interpersonal betrayal that happens to the child. And so that moment, and I choose my words wisely because you're a survivor, Sarah, that moment when the child realizes the betrayal of the taken parent
Yeah.
is, I mean, it's life changing from a healing perspective, but it's also
Mhm.
one of the most difficult things to treat, because it's betrayal of someone you trusted and loved, and you hurt me in a way that I could never even wrap my brain around and think about or conceptualize. Yeah.
And often both parents
Yes.
have betrayed a child in different ways. It
Yes.
depends, on how they've approached things and what they've done. But absolutely, I remember that moment well when it hit me that my father, the primary motivation was not to protect me or because he loved me. There was so much else intertwined. He still loved me and wanted to protect me. Those were there, but they were not the primary motivators. They were somewhere embedded in all of it in this big mess. But then there was a great sense of betrayal from my mother as well in a different way.
Mhm.
Um, a certain lack of acceptance and pushing for me to be someone and something that I wasn't, in a way, to try to make her comfortable,
Mhm.
and just these other things. So I really felt very alone. Like I
Mhm.
didn't, I felt like each of my parents had an agenda, and they both had an agenda.
Of
They
course.
both, in a way, wanted to own me and have control over me. And somewhere there was, it was very difficult to feel that wait, does anybody really care about me? Like, can
Mhm.
I just be like, does anybody, do either of these people really care, really care about me? Or are they just both pushing for what they want out of me? And it was really, really a horrible sense of betrayal. First, that recognition with my father, and
Yep.
then some years later, as I was trying so hard to connect with my mother again,
Mhm.
there was, wow, wait, you loved me as soon as you met me, but what, you loved the 4-year-old, you didn't, you didn't have a chance yet to get to know who I was.
Mhm.
And and just everything that came out, what name for me to use, and culture and identity. There was a tremendous amount of a sense of betrayal and confusion there too, and it took many, many years to work that out, and we have a strong and good relationship. But man, I mean, years of eating disorders. It was really after recovery that everything came out.
Yeah.
I developed a strong eating disorder and went in and out of psych wards because of it, and because of the depression and sadness and confusion that came along. So, I mean, my whole life just blew up and fell apart
Mhm.
completely.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really taken until doing really, really doing that trauma work
Mhm.
that has really been the missing link, recognizing the level of trauma. I understood so much intellectually, but it was just this reactivity and pain that just seemed to be, yeah, a PTSD, a very strong PTSD response. And
Mhm.
again, not just from the years on the run with my father,
Absolutely not. Yeah. Yeah.
a lot from the years after meeting my mother again, because
Mhm.
there were so many layers of trauma there too, for her too, of
Of
course.
course.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah,
it's
and I
really,
think one of the things that you said talk about, Sarah, is that lack of control because your parents are fighting for you and
mhm,
fighting for you for their own needs often.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so I often say to kids when they reach, and when they're adults, because I still see them as adults too,
mhm,
when they reach that point of understanding the betrayal, and saying to them that, two things can be true at the same time. Your
yes,
father can betray you, but also love you. Your
yes,
father can hurt you, but also love you. And your
mhm,
mother can hurt
mhm,
you and also love you. And that's a
absolutely,
really hard thing to
mhm,
understand and a hard place to come to. And it does take years and years and years of healing. And I like what you said in that, there have been times where you've done the work, and there are many times where you have to come back to the work, because trauma healing is not linear in any way, shape, or form. And I have kids that I worked with, oh, I feel so old when I say this, 15 years ago. And now they're 20 and still come back to me for check ins to see how they're doing, because it has implications on all of your relationships. And
yes,
when you are betrayed at that level and then
mhm,
asked to trust again,
mhm,
which is the foundation for every relationship, it's hard. And I think the other piece that you talked about, Sarah, that's really important that I see as my role is when a kid is recovered, safety is turned upside down. Am I wasn't safe here. Am I safe here? I don't know if I'm safe here. But what I do know to be true is that I can create a safe space for them, and I can hear them, and I can see
mhm,
them through a lens that is not, there's no agenda on my lens
mhm,
other than healing. And that is
yeah,
why I think it's so important to find somebody who does the work that I do, so
yes,
that the child can have a voice. Because I
mhm,
mean, you said it very well in that nobody, what your mom sees and what your dad saw were two different things, and they see
Mhm.
it through their lens. And I
mhm.
see it through the lens of a child who needs to heal, or an adolescent, or an adult who needs to heal. Yeah.
Oh, so beautiful. I feel so validated.
Yeah.
And that you do. And I mean, yes, we need more of you out there, because this can make such a difference and help children
Hmm.
avoid the eating disorders and in and
Yeah.
out of psych wards and
Yes.
deep dives into depression that I experienced over many years
Yeah.
after recovery, or after I recovered myself essentially at 17, 18, and
Yeah.
reconnected with my mother. It all started a whole different level of work started then. You know,
Yeah.
when I left my father and invited my mother back into my life.
Yeah.
And yeah, we didn't have the privilege of an Abby or a Heather to to understand what we were going through, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So this was many years ago. So it's really just such a gift and a blessing
Yeah.
to know that there's much more understanding out there for everybody involved in these cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Heather, this has been more than we anticipated, I think, and we're so grateful to you. And just want to ask you one last question. If there's one thing that you want to leave the audience with, what do you want to leave them with? What do you want to tell them?
I think, I hope that millions of people listen to this, and I hope it's a diverse group of people. I think what I want to leave with everybody is an understanding that parental kidnapping results in very complex trauma, and complex in a way that you don't learn about in graduate school. And because I have been doing this for as long as I have, I know that there are more supports and there is more help out there. And I know that there are not just agencies and people like Abby who have changed the clinical world and the advocacy world for parental kidnapping in a way that makes my job easier, really. And I want clinicians to know that if they are interested in learning more about this, that they can reach out to me, that it really is not that different than what we do on a day-to-day basis, because people often say to me, how can you do this? It's so hard, it's so heavy. And
Right.
I don't want to minimize it. It is heavy, but it is what every therapist does, and that's creating a safe place so that you can listen to and hold a story for a survivor. And that is what every clinician does. And so I know that, and I have seen that doing this work helps and it heals. And I encourage clinicians to think outside of the box. And I encourage parents and survivors to know that there is help and you can heal from these processes for sure.
Beautiful. Words of wisdom, of course. Of course.
Thank you
Thank you
so much.
so much, Heather.
Thank
And
you.
yeah,
I geek out and love talking about this stuff, Abby, and it
yeah,
has been an honor to sit with
yeah,
both of you. It really has been a privilege to be a part of
yeah.
this. So thank
And
you,
yeah.
really.
And for us too. Thank you.
Likewise.
And now Sarah is going to tell us about a child who is currently missing and who can use our help because little Ryder does not have a voice right now, and he's looking to us to help him.
Yes. So this is little Ryder Thomas Tay Wilson, who is missing since March 5th, 2022. He went missing from Greenwood, Indiana. He's now 6 years old. He's a little boy. And any information about his whereabouts, you can contact Abby. What's the number for 1-800
The
the
Lost
the
for
lost?
the
Or
National Center. Yeah.
Mhm.
right. And also the Indiana State Police can be reached at 317-899-8577. So any
Yeah.
information about little Ryder Thomas, please reach out.
And if you're listening to us now instead of being on YouTube, please go to missingkids.org and you can see Ryder's picture. So if you do see him, you'll recognize him and help him come home. Thank you. Thank you all
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a great day. Thanks for joining us
Yeah.
on this episode. Thanks again, Heather and Abby.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Sarah. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.